Welcome back to Regaining the Balance. Today we're going to we're going to start up a new research project into whether Jesus was a Phoenician. And this might be a shock to some of you. Um, it certainly was a shock to me when I first sort of came across this idea. And some of you that are part of, say, Martin Liedtke's channel, who follow him, and part of the flat Earth British think tank, as it were. Um, we often hear that the Phoenicians are sort of the bad guys, and that's sort of the kind of idea that we've been kind of going with, and a lot of other people have been kind of going with. And I'm just going to ask some questions because there's some things that I have been coming up with in the past year or so that have kind of really challenged that idea. So it's one of those things where this is going to be a multi-part type of series because I have an enormous amount of questions, an enormous amount of kind of points to go through, and I think that we'll see what happens. And you guys obviously will make up your own minds, obviously, and I think that you guys should definitely make up your own minds. So, without further ado, let's get into this because there's some very interesting stuff. We're gonna go through a lot of different pages, some books, things like that, and we're going to sort of dive into this. So let me share the screen here. Okay, oops, not that screen. There we go. Okay, and we're going to start with El, the deity. Okay, and we're going to find out that a lot of the Levantine type of cultures and a lot of the gods and a lot of all that kind of stuff are very related to each other. So El, or Il in Ugaritic, Phoenician, Hebrew, Syriac, Arabic, Akkadian is the Northwest Semitic word meaning God or deity. Hold on a second, I have to quickly mute something. Let me do that real quick, and yeah, there we go. Okay, so back to this, and this will all be important to the bigger picture here. So, referring as a proper name to any one of the multiple major ancient Near Eastern deities, a rare form, Ilah, represents a predicate from an old Akkadian and in Amorite. The word is derived from the Proto-Semitic archaic bilateral Il, meaning God. Specific deities known as El or Il include the supreme god of ancient Canaanite religion and the supreme god of Eastern Semitic speakers in Mesopotamia's early dynastic period. So, in other words, this god El is very, very, very old. And I would say much older than when the Hebrews came onto the quote-unquote historical scene. So, but we'll get into that. So let's take a look. Linguistic forms and meanings. Cognate forms are found throughout the Semitic languages, and I'll just say that I'm using Wikipedia on this because they actually have a decent collection of the different types of versions of this, which surprised me. But either way, let's get into it. So again, cognate forms are found throughout the Semitic languages include Ugaritic, Ilu, Phoenician, Il, Hebrew, El, Elim, Aramaic, and Akkadian, Ilu, or plural, Ilanu. In Northwestern Semitic, use El was both generic word for any god, which I don't agree with, and I think this is a sneaky sentence to put in, for any god, and the special name or title of a particular god who was distinguished from other gods as being the god. El is listed at the head of many pantheons in some Canaanite and Ugaritic sources. El played a role as father of the gods or of creation. However, because the word sometimes refers to a good other than the great god to a god other than the great god El, it is frequently ambiguous as to whether El followed by another name means the great god El, with a particular epithet applied or refers to other god entirely. For example, the Ugaritic text Il Milk is understood to mean El the king, but Il has the god Hadad. Il as the god Hadad. The Semitic root in Arabic, ilah, or Allah, right? Aramaic, Allah, ilah, Hebrew, Eloah, may be il with a parasitic H, and an I or an il may be with an abbreviated form of an IH. In Ugaritic, the plural form meaning gods, Elim, is equivalent to the Hebrew Elohim, powers. In the Hebrew text, the word is interpreted as being Semitically singular for God by biblical commentators. However, the documentary hypothesis developed originally in the 1870s identifies that different authors, the Jahwist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, and priestly source, were responsible for editing stories from a polytheistic religion into those of a monotheistic religion. Inconsistencies that arise between monotheism and polytheism in the text are reflective of this hypothesis. And that's a very good point, and you guys will see that in short order. The stem il is found prominently in the earliest strata of East Semitic, Northwest Semitic, and South Semitic groups. Personal names, including the stem il, are found with similar patterns in both Amorite and Sabaic, which indicates that probably already in Proto-Semitic, il was both a generic term for God and the common name or a title of a singular particular god. The Proto-Sinaitic, Phoenician, Aramaic, and Hittite text, the Egyptian god Ptah is given the title Du-Gitti, Lord of Gath, and a prism from Tel Lashish, which has on its opposition face the name of Emhotep II, and that's 1435 to 1220, or so they say. The title Du-Gitti is also found in the Sabrit text 353, and points out that the Ptah is often called the Lord or One of eternity and thinks it may be identified of El with Ptah that leads to the epithet Olam, eternal, being applied to El so early and so consistently. However, in the Ugaritic text, Ptah is seemingly identified rather with the craftsman god Kothar Waskasis. The name Raphael or Raphael, meaning God has healed, in Ugarit is attested to in approximately 1350 BCE in one of the Amarna letters of EA 333 found in Tel El Hesi, the ruler of Lachish to the Great One, a Phoenician inscribed amulet of the 7th century BCE from Arzian Tash may refer to El. The extent was translated by Rosenthal. So here goes Rosenthal's translation. An eternal bond has been established for us. Ashur has established it for us, and all the divine beings and the majority of the group of all the holy ones through the bond of heaven and earth forever. However, Cross in 1973 translated it as follows, which is quite different. The Eternal One, Olam, has made a covenant oath with us, and Asherah made a pact with us, and all the sons of El, and the great council of all the holy ones, with oaths of heaven and ancient earth. In some inscriptions, the name El, Kon, Ars, meaning El Creator of Earth, appears, even including the late inscription at Leptis Magna of Tripolitania, dating to the 2nd century. In Hittite texts, the expression becomes the single name Il-Kunirsa, appearing as the husband of Ashurdu, or Asherah, and the father of 77 or 88 sons, which is essentially the Phoenician pantheon in Hittite, Phoenician, Assyrian pantheon, and Babylonian for that matter, and Kassite. I mean, they all kind of share the same type of gods, and we'll go into that in future videos. In the Hurrian hymn to El, published in the Ugaritia 5, he is called Il Brut and Il Din, which Cross says takes as El of the covenant and El the judge, respectively. Interesting. Amorite inscriptions from Samal refer to numerous gods, sometimes by name, sometimes by title, especially by such titles as Liberat, God of the people, Il Abika, God of your father, and Il Lebini, God of our father, and so forth. Various family gods are recorded, divine names listed as belonging to a particular family or clan, sometimes a title, and sometimes by name, including the name Il, God. In Amorite personal names, the most common divine elements are Il, God, Hadad, Adad, Dagon. It is likely that Il is also very often the god called in Akkadian text Amuru or Il Amuru. And you guys will see very soon the connection with Hadad, or should I say Dagon, and the Catholic Church and the way they dress their popes. Ugarit and the Levant. For the Canaanites and the ancient Levantine region as a whole, El or Il was the supreme god, the father of mankind and all creatures. He also fathered many gods, most importantly Hadad, Yam, and Mat, each sharing similar attributes to the Greco-Roman gods Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, respectively. As recorded on the clay tablets of Ugarit, El is the husband of the goddess Asherah. Three pantheons list found at Ugarit, modern Shamra, begin with the four gods Il, and so this is in Syria, right? The four gods Il, Ib, which according to Cross is the name of the generic kind of deity, perhaps the divine ancestor of the people. El Dagnu, which is Dagon, Baal-Sepan, which is the god Hadu or Hadad. Though Ugarit has a large temple dedicated to Dagon and another one to Hadad, there was no such temple dedicated to El. And as a matter of fact, you will find that there pretty much are no temples dedicated to El, because El is considered as El Elyon, El the Most High, even though they don't happen to put that on here, which was strange. But maybe they do it here down in the Hebrew section. But he's considered a god outside of all this, so there was no point in putting a temple to a god that has nothing to do with the quote illusionary life, so to speak. But all the demigods, yes, because they represent something within life. So continuing, El is called again and again Toru El, Bull El, or the bull god. He is Batnu bin Wati, creator of creatures, Abu Bani Ili, father of the gods, and Abu Adami, father of man. He is Kaniyunu, Olam, creator eternal, and the epithet Olam appearing in Hebrew form in the Hebrew name of God, El Olam, God eternal, in Genesis 21:33. He is Hatukuka, your patriarch. El is the gray-bearded ancient one, full of wisdom, Malku, king, Abu Saminma, father of years, El Gibor, El the warrior. He is also named Iptin of unknown meaning, variously rendered as Laptan, Lapitan, or Luptani, shrouded face by Strong's Hebrew concordances. El, father of heaven, Saturn, and his major son, Hadad, father of earth, Jupiter, are symbolized both by the bull and both wear bull horns on their headdresses. In Canaanite mythology, El builds a desert sanctuary with his children and his two wives, leading to speculation that at one point El was a desert god. Mysterious Ugaritic text, the Senchar and Shalim, tells us, perhaps near the beginning of all things, El came to the shores of the sea and saw two women who bobbed up and down. El was sexually aroused and took the two with him, killed a bird by throwing a staff at it, and roasted it over a fire. He asked the woman to tell him when the bird was fully cooked, and then to address him either by husband or as father, for he would henceforth behave to them as they called him. They saluted him as husband, and when they lay with him, he gave birth to Shashar, dawn, and Shalim, dusk. And again, El lay with his wives, and the wives gave birth to the gracious gods, cleavers of the sea, children of the sea. The names of these wives are not explicitly provided, but some confusing rubrics at the beginning of the account mention the goddess Athirat, otherwise known as El's chief wife, and becomes Ramahayu, the one of the womb, otherwise unknown. In the Ugaritic Baal cycles, El is introduced dwelling on or in Mount Lel, Lel possibly meaning night, at the fountains of the two rivers, at the spring of the two deeps. He dwells in a tent, according to some interpretations of the text, which may explain why he had no temple in Ugarit. As to the rivers and the spring of the two deeps, these might refer to real streams, or to the mythological sources of the saltwater ocean and the freshwater sources under the earth, or the waters above the heavens and the waters beneath the earth. And I'd also like to point out, they talk about how El is living in a tent, and if you guys know your Old Testament, that's the same story after Moses came down with the Ten Commandments, and then they set up the tent so that the God Yahweh or El, I'm not exactly sure which one they use for that book, but lives also in a tent. The fragment and Ugaritic is way older than than the Old Testament. The fragment text describes a banquet to which El invites the other gods and then disgraces himself by becoming outrageously drunk and passing out after confronting an otherwise unknown Yahweh, he with the horns and tail. Sounds like the devil or something. The text ends with an incantation of the curse of some disease, possibly hangover. What a weird story. The Hebrew form appears in Latin letters in Standard Hebrew inscription as El, in the Tiberian Hebrew inscriptions as El. El is a generic word for God that could be used for any god, including Hadad, Moloch, or Yahweh. Yes, but at the same time, it just refers to them as gods, or like they say here, the Elohim, which is plural for gods. In the Tanakh, Elohim is the normal word for God of the great gods, or gods with an S, given that I am suffix makes the word plural in Hebrew, but the form El also appears mostly in poetic passages in the patriarchal narratives attributed to the priestly source of the documentary hypothesis. It occurs 217 times in the Masoretic texts, 73 times in the Psalms, and 55 times in the book of Job, otherwise mostly in poetic passages or passages written in an elevated prose. It occasionally appears with the definite article that Ha-El, the God, for example, in 2 Samuel 22, 31 to 33 to 48. Theological position of the Tanakh is that the name El and Elohim, when used in singular to mean the supreme God, refer to Yahweh, besides whom other gods are supposed to be non-existent or insignificant. Whether this was long-standing belief or relatively new one has long been a subject of inconclusive scholarly debate. About the prehistory of the sources of the Tanakh and about the prehistory of Israelite religion in the P strands, Exodus 6:3 may be translated, I revealed myself to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, El Shaddai, but was not known to them by the name Yahweh. However, it is said in Genesis 14:18 to 20 that Abraham accepted the blessing of El when Melchizedek, who we'll be looking at very soon, the king of Salem, in the land of by the way, Salem, okay, and high priest of the deity El Elyon blessed him. Our scholarly position is that the identification of Yahweh and El is late, and that Yahweh was earlier thought of as only one of many gods and not normally identified with El. And we will look into the Gnostic interpretation of that a little bit later on, which will go into that idea. Another is that much of Hebrew Bible, the name El is an alternative name for Yahweh, but in the Elohist, the priestly tradition is considered an earlier name than Yahweh. Mark Smith has argued that Yahweh and El were originally separate, but were considered synonymous from very early on. The name Yahweh is used in the Bible Tanakh in the first book, Genesis 2:4 and Genesis 4:26 says that at the time people began to call upon the name of the Lord. In some places, especially Psalm 29, Yahweh is clearly envisioned as a storm god, and that's who the Canaanite Hadad as actually a storm god, if I'm not mistaken, or if it's not Dagon. Something not true of El, so far as we know, although true of his son, Baal-Hadad, there you go. It is Yahweh who is prophesied to one day battle Leviathan, the serpent, and slay the dragon with the sea in Isaiah 27:1. The slaying of the serpent myth is a deed attributed to both Hadad and Anat, the Ugaritic text, but not to El. And as you see over here, this picture of the destruction of the Leviathan, this is the same story of Typhon and the same exact story, right? The same mythological killing of the serpent, killing of the dragon, that kind of thing. Such mythological motifs are variously seen as late survivals from a period when Yahweh held a place in theology comparable to that of Hadad or at Ugarit, or as the late henotheistic, monotheistic applications to Yahweh of deeds more commonly attributed to Hadad, or simply as examples of eclectic application of the same motifs and imagery to various different gods. Similarly, it is argued inconclusively whether El Shaddai or El Olam or El Elyon and so forth were originally understood as separate divinities. Albrecht Alt presents his theories on the original differences of such goals in Durgat der Vater in 1929. And both have argued that from patriarchal times, these different names were in fact generally understood to refer to the same single great god, El. As the position Frank Moore across, what is certain is that the form El does appear in Israelite names from very early period, including the name Israel, meaning El strives or struggled with El. I think struggled with El is interesting. According to the Oxford Companion to World Mythology, it seems almost certain that the god of the Jews evolved gradually from the Canaanite El, who was in all likelihood the god of Abraham. If El was the high god of Abraham, Elohim, the prototype of Yahweh, Ashrei, it was his wife, and there are archaeological indications that she was perceived as such before she was in effect divorced in the context of emerging Judaism in the 7th century BCE. And see 2 Kings 23:15. The apparent plural or of form Elim or Elim gods with an S occurs only 4 times in the Tanakh. Psalm 29, understood as the enthronement psalm, begins a psalm of David ascribed to Yahweh, sons of God, Bene Elim, ascribed to Yahweh, glory and strength. Psalm 89:6, verse 7 in Hebrew has, for who in the skies compare to Yahweh, who can be likened to Yahweh among the sons of gods? Bene Elim. Traditionally, Bene Elim has been interpreted as sons of the mighty, mighty ones, or El can mean mighty, though such use may be metaphorical. Compare the English expression by God awful. This is possible also that the expression Elim in both places descends from an archaic stock phrase in which ilm was a singular form and the m enslitic, therefore to be translated as sons of El. The M enslitic appears elsewhere in the Tanakh and in other Semitic languages. Its meaning is unknown, possibly simply emphasis. It appears in similar contexts in Ugaritic texts where the expression of bin il alternates with bin ilim, but both must mean sons of El. The phrase with M enslitic also appears in Phoenician inscriptions as late as the 5th century BCE. One of the other 2 occurrences in the Tanakh is in the Song of Moses. Okay. That's in Exodus 15:11. Who is like among the gods? Elim, Yahweh? Question mark. The final occurrence is in Daniel 11:36, and the king will do according to his pleasure, and he will exalt himself and magnify himself over every god, El, and against the God of gods, El Elim, he will speak outrageous things and will prosper until the indignation is accomplished or that which is decided will be done. There are a few cases in the Tanakh where some think El, referring to the god El, is equated with Yahweh. One is Ezekiel 28:2, in the taunt against a man who claims to be divine, in this instance the leader of Tyre. Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, thus says the Lord Yahweh, because your heart is proud, and you have said, I am El, God, in the seat of Elohim gods. I am enthroned in the middle of seas. You are man and not El, even though you have made your heart like the heart of Elohim gods. What an interesting quote. Here, El might refer to a generic god or to the high god El. When viewed as applying to the king of Tyre specifically, the king was probably not thinking of Yahweh. Probably not. When viewed as a general taunt against anyone making divine claims, it may or may not refer to Yahweh depending on the context. Well, I would say in the context of Phoenician, definitely not. In Judges 9:46, we find El Berit, God of the covenant, seemingly the same as Baal El Brit, Lord of the covenant, whose worship has been condemned a few verses earlier. See Baal for a discussion of this passage, Psalm 82:1. Again, Baal Hadad is the same exact thing, right? And the Psalm 82:1 says, Elohim God stands in the council of El. He judges among the gods, Elohim. Excuse me. This could mean that Yahweh judges along many other gods as one of the council of the high god El. However, it can also mean that Yahweh stands in the divine council, generally known as the council of El. As El judging among the other members of the council, the following verses in which God condemns those who he says were previously named gods, Elohim, and sons of the Most High, suggest the God here is in fact El judging the lesser gods. An archaic phrase appears in Isaiah 14:13, Kok Be'il, stars of God, referring to the circumpolar stars that never set, possibly especially to the 7 stars of the Ursa Minor. The phrase also occurs in the Pyrgi inscriptions as Hekabim, il, preceded by the definite article H and followed by the M in slictic. Two other apparent fossilized expressions are Arze cedars of God. That's another throw out to the Phoenicians. Generally translated something like mighty cedars, goodly cedars, in Psalm 18:10, in Hebrew verse 11, and in Ke Karehe El, mountains of gods, generally translated something like a great mountain, mighty mountains in Psalm 36:7 and Hebrew verses 6 for the reference of some Deuteronomy to 70 gods of God, and Deuteronomy to 70 sons of God, corresponding to the 70 sons of El in the Ugaritic text. See Elion. So how interesting in reference in some texts of Deuteronomy to the 70 gods of El. So as you can see already, this is completely intermixed with, quote unquote Judaism. And if you guys haven't listened to the ancient fragment books yet, you should definitely go and take a listen to those, because that gives you some accounts of things that you see in the Bible, but they're completely opposite. They're totally turned around. So it's very interesting. So the next thing we'll take a quick look at is good old Dagon, okay? Dagon or Dagon or whatever else you want to call him. And he was one of the main, part of the main pantheons. As you can see, Sumeria, Hebrew, Phoenician, Ugarit, Amorites, Assyria, all of them. The whole area yet again. Okay, and then we see Dagon. Here we go. I mean, they call him a pagan priest, but I have a problem with the word pagan nowadays. Like I'm supposed to trust what the church is supposed to be telling me when the more I show you guys, the more you'll know why I'm laughing and why I have such an attitude towards that. But as you see, here we go in the Babylonian version of this, Dagon with his little conical fish hat, the Pope with his conical fish hat. All right, now we're going to look at really quickly at Emmanuel, because again, El, right? Emmanuel, God is with us. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but one of the things I want to point out is that Yahweh himself, let's see here, Yahweh, as it says here, the worship of Yahweh alone began in the earliest with Elijah in the 9th century BCE, or so they say, but more likely with the prophet Hosea in the 8th. Even then, it remained the concern of a small party before gaining ascendancy in the Babylonian exile in an early post-exilic period. The early supporters of this faction were widely regarded as being monolartrists, rather than true monotheists. They did not believe Yahweh was the only God in existence, but instead believed he was the only God the people of Israel should worship. How interesting. Finally, the national crisis of exile and the followers of Yahweh went a step further and outright denied that other deities aside from Yahweh even existed, thus marking the transition from monolatrism to monotheism. So there you guys go. You guys see that around the quote-unquote 8th century BCE, they completely dropped all references to El, and Yahweh was the only one done. All right. So here we go back to Emmanuel, which is the name of Jesus, given as a name of Jesus, and it means God is with us, right? In Aramaic, and I guess also in Hebrew, for that matter, since they're extremely close languages. And the thing is that if this was true in Jesus' day, okay, and you would indeed have dropped the El moniker from God and Yahweh was your whole thing, then he would not have been called Emmanuel. He would have been called Emannu-YHWY. So I just want to make that point because Emmanuel is still El is still used in Phoenicia as their most high God, the true God, the highest God of all, the thing that isn't connected with the quote unquote duality of life, and that's a big difference. Emmanuel, they don't use El anymore in Hebrew; they use Yahweh, so it would have been spelled like this if that was the case. Okay, and now we have the first priest, Melchizedek. Okay, and you see all the different spellings here. King of righteousness in Aramaic, In Armenian, they show you the different spellings. And Christianity, according to the Epistle of the Hebrews, Jesus Christ is identified as, quote, high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And so Jesus assumes the role of high priest once and for all. It is speculated that the story of Melchizedek is an informal insertion into the narration, possibly inserted in order to give validity to the priesthood and tithes connected with the Second Temple. I hope you guys picked that one up. His name indicates he may have worshipped Zedek, a Canaanite deity worshipped in pre-Israelite Jerusalem. So, here we go. In the majority of the Masoretic Hebrew text, the name is written in two words, Melchizedek. And how about that? Siddiq in some manuscripts. Sedek was the name of a deity appeared in the theogony provided by the Roman-era Phoenician writer Philo-Bibulus in an account. That's funny how they call him a Phoenician writer when other people call him a Jewish writer. I wonder. In an account preserved by Eusebius in the Prepario Evangelica and attributed to the still earlier century Neathon, which we already read, and is in the audiobooks of the ancient manuscripts. So, here we go. You guys can take a look at that, but that's where the Siddiq comes from. Let's see here. The name is compared from the two elements, Melche, king, and Sedek, which means they're either righteousness or proper name Sedek, with the addition of Hirik Compaganes. It looks like it says Il, indicating the archaic construct form Melchi, meaning king of, so that the name literally translates to king of righteousness, or king is Zedek. Indicating that worshiping Siddiq, as I showed you, a Canaanite deity worshipped in pre-Israelite Jerusalem. The latter, however, is often dismissed as the Siddiq comes only from a Phoenician poet in the Roman times. I wonder how that happens. Mainstream scholarly understanding of these names, my king is righteousness and my lord is righteousness, respectively, is that they refer to the concept of righteousness and not to a god, which I probably would agree with. The name is formed in parallel with Adonai-Sedek, which is also king of Salem, mentioned in the book of Joshua, where the element Malik, king, is replaced by Adon, lord. Parallel theophoric names with Sedek replaced with Yahu, or those of Melchijah and Adoniah, both biblical characters replaced in time of David. And Adonai is definitely another one of those Phoenician pantheon gods. I forget which one he represents in Greek and Roman, but there you go. Melchizedek's name is mentioned twice in the Hebrew Bible, the first in Genesis and the second in Psalms. All right, so let's just read real quick. I'm just going to kind of plow through this. If you guys want to look up the Melchizedek stuff, there's a lot here, and I don't really, it's just, a lot of it, I think, is them trying to really put things into place. As you see, you have all these various different types of rabbinic and Hebrew kind of differentiations of it. I'm not going to go into those necessarily, but you guys can. I'm just going to show you where he shows up twice in the Bible. So in Genesis 14:18-20, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, Ursalem, brought out bread and wine, and is the priest of the Most God High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most God, or High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thine hands, and he gave him tithe from all. All right, and then let's see here, and I think the next one is, all right, so Psalms and the second final Hebrew Bible mention Melchizedek in Psalm 110:4, and many translations that follow the Septuagint translate it as the Lord hath sworn and will not repent, thou art a priest forever after the manner of Melchizedek. And then we see the same thing in Christianity. So, and let's just take a quick look. Here we go. So this is Hebrews 7, letter of Hebrews 7, Melchizedek the priest. Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest. This is, of course, the New Testament, and priest of the God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. And it's interesting that he gave him a tenth of everything, as if he is being ruled over by this king. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living. One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. Jesus, like Melchizedek, if perfection could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron? For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also. He whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life. For it is declared, quote, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek," unquote. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless. For the law made nothing perfect, and a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath, but he became priest with an oath when God said to him, quote, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are priest forever," unquote. Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Now there has been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for the sins once for all when he offered himself. For the new law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son who has been made perfect forever. So here we go. That's the Melchizedekian thing. And let's see, what should we look at first here? I think let's take a look at the possible origin of Melchizedek and the name Melchizedek. So I have this book called The Social History of Kamrupra, and it is a history of this area in, I think it's an area in India. It's a strange name. But listen to this. In the Vedic age, the Assyrians, became separated from the Aryans, and having crossed the borders of India, settled in Persia or Turkey. Gradually, they increased in strength and influence. And I'm going to skip around a little bit here because I don't want to read all of this because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make any difference from what we're looking at. And it is now over 5,000 years since they founded the kingdom of Assur or Assyria, about 200 miles northwest of Babylon, and founded the capital of Assur on the banks of the Tigris. Their possessions extended from Asia Minor to the Caucasus Mountains. In the Old Testament, mention is made of a royal priest under the name of Melchizedek. Genesis 14:17. From Caucasus, he went over to Salem, Jerusalem, again, Jerusalem, right? Salem of the land of and became king and priest of the supreme El. After his name, Melchi came to denote king and high priest in Syrian and Assyrian languages. It is too well known to be mentioned that in olden times, territories were generally named after their peoples residing in them. I apologize for the butchering of these Indian names. In the Kiskindeyahakana and the Ramayana, we are told that far off from India in the northwest there live the Melchas, the Daradas, the Yavanas, the Madras, and also there was a country named after the Melchas. From the geographical account given in the epic, we have reasons to believe that this Melcha country was not far from the Mount Caucasus. It is very likely that it was the priests of this place who were known in ancient times as Melchi, Sanskrit Melcha. It may seem superfluous to note that Assyrian high priests were selected and appointed from here from a study of the Samhita portion of the Vedas. Also, we learn that at a time was when the boundaries of Aryavarta extended up into the borders of Babylon. The spite of Vedic Aryans against the high priest of Asuras, as indicated in the Satapatha Brahmana and later Sanskrit literature, was due to the defective way in which they pronounced Vedic mantras and hymns. From the Nirukta or Yaska, we come to learn that at one time the people of Cambodia spoke Vedic Sanskrit. Even prior to that, a degenerated form of Vedic Sanskrit was in use among the Melchas, who were high priests of the Asuras. This is hinted in the Zend Avesta by Ahur Mazd or Asura Maya, and their zeal to spread the religion and extend their influence to Melchis or Melcha, high priest of Caucasus, Canaanites, Caucasus, who knows, crossed the Kailasa mountain and reached the hills of Kamrupa via Tibet. All right, we're going to skip over to the next part here, which I think is, what is it, this one? Yeah. So the Vara Purana says among the Brahmanas of Aryavarta, all except Magadha and Mathura are known to have sprung from the Kanyakuja stock. Mathurajas is said to have sprung from the sweat of the person of Vara. Hence it will be seen that the Puranas of the Brahmas admit to a new Brahmana being born a Varaha. And I know all these names don't mean a lot to you guys, but we're going to be doing a full reading of this book because this has some great information in it. And maybe the real origins of some of these Semitic races that ended up becoming Kassites and Assyrians and Babylonians and all that stuff. On the authority of the Old Testament, the case of the high priest and king named Melchizedek or Melchisedec has already been noticed in these pages. The writer in the Encyclopedia Britannica has referred to him as King of Salem, the priest supreme El Lyrion. He says further, El was regarded as an equivalent to Baal, and as to this Baal, we are told it is the, quote, primitive power of nature which divides itself into the generative and conceptive or productive power, unquote. Again, the, quote, Baal is the god of productive element in its widest sense. Thus, from the discussion of Western writers on this question, it will seem that while Baal was regarded as god generative and El was regarded as goddess of conceptive or productive power, El, Ilah, mentioned in the Vedas as a goddess, may possibly be the same as the Babylonian goddess Ili or Bilat Ili, queen of gods. According to Sayana, she is the goddess presiding over the earth. Melchizedek or Melchizedek was the first and chief votary of Baal and El or Ilah, and this Ella or Ilah seems to have subsequently been transformed into Kamakia. The ceremony of the Ambuvakchi symbolizes the menstrual periods of goddess Ila or Prithivi, earth. Even now, Kamakaya is supposed to pass through this period on that occasion. Thus, there remains but little doubt as to the identity of El and Kamakia. And then there's a section here about Melchizedek. Melchizedek, an order of priesthood mentioned by the Apostle Paul in the Epistle of the Hebrews, as I just read to you guys, as higher as well as more ancient and than the order of the Aaronic priesthood under the Mosaic economy. Melchizedek appears to have the only individual to hold the office of high priest by divine appointment before the giving of the law. And in the statement of the apostle that Jesus Christ was a, quote, priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, may be perceived a beautiful proprietary. Far unlike the Levitical priesthood, the sacred office was combined with regal authority in the case of Melchizedek, thus clearly pointing him out as a striking type of our high priest, of whom it was prophesied by Zechariah, quote, he shall be a priest upon his throne, and besides the priesthood of Melchizedek was more honorable, being instituted previous to and independent of the Mosaic economy, and one to which, as we learn from the reasoning of the apostle in Hebrew, the Levitical priesthood was distinctly subordinate, for separated, as Melchizedek is declared to have in point of descent from all around him. He is considered as receiving tithes from those who, though not yet born, were represented by their progenitor Abraham. And by his connection with the order of Melchizedek, our high priest was identified with an economic independent of the temporary institutions of Moses, and accordingly it is said he was made not after the law of a carnal commandment, but after the power of an endless life. We are brought to the comfortable and delightful conclusion that we have an everlasting and unchangeable high priest appointed of God, as was Aaron, but called after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedekians held Melchizedek to be the power of God and superior to Christ. There you guys go. And then other people, of course, actually connect him with Christ. So, let's see here. Okay, and then we have one more bit here. Okay, yes. Okay, so the word Melcha seems to have no longer been obnoxious. Oh, no, let's do that. It has been previously noted that in ancient Assyria, Melchizedek was both a king and a high priest, in the same way as found on many occasions. The Melcha kings of Kamrupa also officiated as high priests. This custom seems to have come down even to the days of Raja Visva Sinya of the Mech family, who founded the royal house of Koch, Bihar. It was during the reign of his son Nanarayana that the revival of the Brahminical supremacy took place to the gradual abolition of this time-honored custom. Both he and his brother Sukladhavja were untiring in their devotion to the Brahma Nas, whom they had brought over from Mithilia and Gwada and established there. The result in increasing the powers of the Brahmanas and the decreasing of the supremacy of the privileged classes. Thus, even those who had long enjoyed the rights and privileges of discharging the priestly functions in the temples of the goddess Kamakhya, as we read earlier, and the Kamatesvari or Kamada or Gaswanimari were deprived of this privilege, which was transferred to the Brahmanas. Nay, they were even barred forever from entering into the precincts of the palaces of worship. The Brahmanas, whom they themselves had established and patronized, were too shrewd for them and gave them to understanding the serious evil that would befall them even if they would visit the places of worship. Since then, under the superstitious threat, the royal house of Koch Bihar, again, the Melchas, has always abstained from entering the temples, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And, okay, so they're abstained from going into both of these temples. The manners and customs, rites, and observances of the primitive Phoenicians and Assyrians were identical in many respects. The chief deities of the Phoenician pantheon are found also to have been accorded important places in the Assyrian pantheon. And I would also mention Kassite and Ugarit and Babylonian. It is a matter of no small surprise and curiosity that in Kamarupa or Assam, the Koch descendants of the Panis, and the Panis here are actually referred to as the Phoenicians, as well as the Mech descendants of the Melechas, are found to observe from time immemorial those very articles of faith and manners and customs which these two peoples are found to have observed thousands of years back in Asia Minor. This fact has led many to regard these two different races, the Koch and the Mech, as originally the same. In the Yogyantri, both of them have been spoken of as Kuvacha and Melacha. So there you go. There is an Indian connection right there, guys. Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, I do have, no, we'll go back to that one. Okay, so continuing, we're going to kind of go back to the word El for half a second, okay? Because I am bilingual. I speak both French and English, as you guys probably know from my translation stuff. They're all French translations. From the books on the other videos I have of Rome and the St. Felix flood, and way more to come. But one of the things that I noticed and I thought was very interesting is that in all Romance languages, or so Romance languages are said to be come from Latin, okay, and then so what we have here is we have all these Romance languages, right, and these are all the different quote unquote languages that are similar to the Romance kind of thing, and it claims that it comes from Latin, essentially, Roman, Romance, whatever else. And the thing is, it's interesting about this is that all these languages actually got their start with Phoenician writings, and I'll be showing that in future videos when we get into actual historical context of all their little their satellites and their colonies and all the different places. And I mean, I'm telling you, they just spread their language everywhere. It's really crazy. But one of the things that I got to point out is this. Okay, in India, you have the word namaste, right? I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but what I'm going to go down to specifically is where does it say it here? Okay, so there is, okay, maybe I will read it. Hindi pronunciation, sometimes spoken as, okay, in contemporary, it's found in India and Nepal, as well as among the Hindu diaspora worldwide. The gesture, but not the term namaste for it. It is widely used in parts of Southeast Asia where Indian religions are strong. It is used both for greeting and leave taking. Namaste is usually spoken with a slight bow and hands pressed together, palms touching, fingers pointed upwards, thumbs close to the chest. The gesture is called the Anjali Mudra, and standing posture of incorporating it as the Pranamasana. In Hinduism, it means I bow to the divine in you. Namaste may also be spoken without the gesture, or the gesture may be performed wordlessly. And I know you guys have heard this a million times, and it's almost become a meme in a lot of ways with the way people use that, you know what I mean, and how other people make fun of the spiritual-minded folk who kind of use it. And I kind of think I like the part of it where it is. Here it is. This is the part I think is kind of neat, and the one I like the best is, according to sociologist Holly Oxhandler, it is a Hindu term which means, quote, the sacred in me recognizes the sacred in you. Okay, so they're literally calling each other divine, as an expression. Okay, now let's go back really quickly to the word El. El is both Il or El. In Romance languages, all references to male are Il. All references to female are El. So before you say he or she, you're literally almost saying like that divine female, that divine male, in a much older context. And so when you have those kinds, when you speak in French or Italian or Spanish or Portuguese or any of these languages, and you refer to a man or a woman, not in the first person but in the third person, like that's how it's said. And the thing is, all these languages have have an original basis in Phoenician and not in Latin. And there's a lot of the Slavic and all these other things created these languages as what they are, because obviously languages are alive and they grow. But I wanted to point that out. And as another point, about that particular thing, here is the Kolbrin Bible, which if you guys have never heard of that, one of my subscribers sent me a link and to a guy who has it, and this is the page here. It's realityfiles.com, the Kolbrin Bible PDF, and this here is his YouTube page. So if you guys want to check his stuff out, but I appreciate that he provided this, even though this is, I'm going to do a quick quote because it is a book, so to speak, in circulation. So on the whole idea of the word El and the idea of namaste and all that other stuff, listen to what this says. And the interesting thing about the Kolbrin Bible is that it's written, I think, on vellum, and it was found when somebody tried to torch a church in Glasgow, or somewhere in Scotland. It was an arson, and they found this book in there. And this book has a lot of, it's like an ancient history that like precedes a lot of other things, and it reads just like a Bible. So I would definitely suggest at least peeking into it, because it's got some pretty interesting stuff. So on the idea of people being having a divine nature, here we read, he came and separated men out from the errors of the world. He brought men a mirror unto which they could look and see their own divinity. He opened a door now open to all, and those who choose to pass through and stand on the road to the eternal. He raised up the fallen and healed the afflicted. He woke those who slept and reminded those who had forgotten. He enlightened the righteous and gathered in his house and those who were lost. And so there you guys go. And I'm sure we can come up with a lot more quotes, given some time of searching around. But there you guys go. There's another use of the word El, and as they talk about how even in here they talk about how they use El to refer to a god, or El to refer to a god. So El Hadad, or El Asheroth, or something like that. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. You know, you know what I'm saying? Like that could be a connection. It might not be a connection. I kind of think it is a connection because the further I get into exposing a lot of this interesting information, the more it'll start to really, I think, congeal. But that'll be up to you guys to connect those dots. So I'm gonna try to lay them out for you. So Yahweh. Okay, so Yahweh is, it seems like he is a subsidiary of the god El. And in Gnostics, we're going to read here on this website called ChristianReincarnation.com. For the Gnostics, the creator of this world wasn't the true prime creator, but a demiurge, a quote, craftsman, unquote, a fallen angel who also has an evil side, while the real God, the true prime creator, who Jesus called Father, i.e., El, is unrestrictedly good. An imperfect demiurge created an imperfect world. It has been shown that the Gnostics identified this imperfect demiurge, quote unquote, God, with the old God of the Old, or the God of the Old Testament. Yahweh, who they also called Yaldabaoth, who wants to keep humans in a state of ignorance in a material world, who punishes their attempts to achieve knowledge and insight and to eat from the tree of knowledge. The demiurge is a lesser god who wants to be the only one. The text of the Apocryphon of John, or the secret book of John, states, he is impious in his madness that dwells in him, for he said, I am God, and no other God exists except me, since he is ignorant of the place from where his strength comes, or his strength come. Could this be an explanation for all the abominable cruelties which, after all, literally described in the Old Testament? And I mean, it kind of has a point. In my way, if you go to that section where it says, oh yeah, the abominable cruelties, this page, this is like, look at this, like, and I've always, ever since I was a child, I always asked, and I grew up Christian, or I'm sorry, I grew up Catholic, and I went through the whole thing, the entire class, I mean, my whole life was just always religious class before church and all that stuff. I mean, I was fully put into the indoctrination process, but one of my questions is it logically, even as a child, I was like, how was God a loving God, but yet all of this happens? And these are all quotes that this guy dutifully put down that shows you how, almost in a way, psychotic this quote unquote Yahweh seems to be. I mean, there is some really, really crazy stuff, and some of it's like genocidal in a lot of ways. So it's very weird, But the idea that it creates this a demiurge that creates this like an imperfect material world, and then we have the interesting Hollywood connection of Stranger Things. Okay? We have Stranger Things, where in Stranger Things, these kids are fighting against the Demigorgon, okay, which the concept itself can be traced back to the original misread term of the demiurge. And what does the Demigorgon do in this particular TV show? It creates this place called the Upside Down, right? And then the only one who can fight the demiurge is 11, otherwise known by all the kids in short as L. So chew on that for a half a second. Because to me, that is very, very interesting. And one of the last things I want to point out to you guys on this part one, because I have an insane amount of information to sort of buttress this idea. This is only the beginning. We're going to be deconstructing archaeology and the Bible and all these stories and all these different accounts and these different Bibles. You know what I mean? There's just so many different things. But when you start to look at all the clues, it starts to become very obvious. And the next one we're going to look at is the location of the Bible, as in Galilee, and we're going to see some of the things in the Bible where you see Jesus running away from Jerusalem because the Pharisees and all that are mad at him, and of course they want to stone him to death. And he always seems to go back to this area in Galilee where he feels safe. And why would he feel safe there if it wasn't a predominantly Jewish community? Not to mention that, but it's due east of Phoenicia itself. Where you look at Galilee and that whole area, it's due east to that. And if you are a person that still is believing in the Bible stories in and of itself, then the question is that this whole thing between King David and King Solomon with King Hiram of Tyre or Sidon, I think, I forget which one, and how they supposedly built the temples of Solomon and all these other things, but then they gave him 22 cities and all this land, and where would you think they would have given him? Probably right next to Phoenicia proper itself, i.e. the Galilean area. So there's that. But we're going to be looking into that in way more detail in the future, because I have to set things up just to show you guys, with scripture writings, and then we'll take a look at maps, and then we'll take a look at how strange the stories are versus the geography and a bunch of other things. So, but one of the last things I want to show you guys, just as a very clear understanding that even in the Bible itself, at the end of his life, Jesus, says at the end of his life, the ninth hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. He said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, right? Which in our Bibles will always say, my God, why have you forsaken me? But the Bible I have here, that I'm looking at here, is actually a what's called the Four Gospels according to the Eastern Version. So what this is that this is actually translated from Aramaic specific, okay? And here they're so after he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He then, at the moment of his death, says, I am finished, and his head goes down, right? And all the stuff happens, okay? But that never really made sense to me whenever I read it. Why would he say, why have you forsaken me, if your whole purpose was to do this? However, in Aramaic, we see that it says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, for this I was kept. And here it is also, this was my destiny for which I was born. Again, this was my destiny for which I was born. My God, for this I was kept. Not why have you forsaken me? I mean, what an absolutely huge difference in the meaning of the last word of Jesus Christ. And you have to wonder, because this makes way more sense after he says, I'm finished, than why have you forsaken me? Which to me never made any sense. And that's the thing. It's like, it's all the little tiny clues where you get these little rays of sunlight. Again, Eli, Eli, right? He's not saying Yahweh, is he? He's not saying Yahweh, Yahweh, not at all. He's saying Eli, Eli. And obviously he's talking about the high God, Elion. So yet again, here we go. We have a whole different, to me this is huge, right? This whole line by itself, this was my destiny for which I was born, or for this I was kept. And I've also seen it, I've also seen it translated as, my God, how much have you praised and glorified me? Because the reality is that, and I'm going to show you just real quick as I flip through the beginning of this book, because they tell you in the book, where am I at? Oh, this is still introduction. Okay, so take a look at this. Words with many meanings, you see, and they're showing you in Aramaic, okay, that there are different meanings for different words. And I like the fact that they throw this in the very beginning, because in essence, they also tell you in little spots where, hey, this is, there are different versions of these kinds of things. So I think this is a kind of a neat book. I like this book a lot. It definitely got some insights. I bet you there's a heck of a lot more interesting different types of translations in this particular book, which I'll be getting into. Maybe I'll even read it. Who knows? If you guys want me to read it, let me know in the comment section, and we can make an attempt. It's not the entire Bible itself, so it's it's still a lot though, isn't it? Jeez. So it's 260 pages, not including maps and whatnot, which is just 2 pages here. So, but yeah, I mean, take a look at that, and I don't know, guys. I think it's pretty interesting. There's some pretty interesting stuff. The next couple of videos on this particular subject, I'm definitely going to get into a lot more detail in terms of like, I don't know. I don't know how to really express what it is, to tell you the truth, because are they proofs? Are they facts? I'm not going to call them facts, because there are very few true facts in life, it seems, nowadays. I mean, just look around and pay attention. But like, there's a lot more to this, guys. Okay. Oh, I remember what it was. There was one more thing I needed to show you guys, and I can't believe that where is it? This is strange. Let me see if I can find it. There was one more book that I thought I had opened, but it doesn't appear that I do have it opened. Four Gospels, Kolbrin, Social. Okay, so I guess I'll have to bring that to you guys for the next video. But yeah, there's it had to do with the. Oh, I know what it was. Hold on a second. I think I got it, guys. I think I got it. Hold on. Nope. Yes, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen again real quick. Okay, so I don't know how I just put in Phoenician priests giving communion in wine and bread, and I came across this book called The Sixth Gospel to the Other Story of Christianity, which I'm going to have to see if I could find a copy of, because boy, does that seem pretty interesting. So here we go. At a 1,000-year interval in Genesis and the Chronicles, the Bible gives 2 proofs of a Phoenician credo. The first one is reported words of, again, Melchizedek, around 2000 BC. Of course, all these dates just throw out the window. Who, God knows, L knows who. Who knows where the dates are, So Genesis 14 and 18, Melchizedek the king brought forth bread and wine, and he was the great priest of El Elyon, like we read. Okay, and as the alphabet was not yet invented yet, at least the official one we use, the transmission was the result of an oral tradition, which may not necessarily be the case. It could also have been written down in cuneiform, and we just don't know that. So the Eucharist of bread and wine is dedicated exclusively to El Elohim. So Ruel, which I forget who that is. Oh, Jethro, around 1250 CBC, repeated the same ritual of the blessing in Exodus 18:12. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for, it says G, but I think it means Elohims. And Aaron came and all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses, but not the wine, if you noticed. And here we have a picture of the Phoenician priest giving communion of bread and wine. 13th century CBC in the Louvre. So, bread and wine, guys. A Phoenician priest giving bread and wine communion. Okay? King Hiram of Tyre wrote of his credo when the Huron king of the Tyre answered in writing, which he sent to Solomon, because the Yahweh Adonai hath loved his people. He had made the king over them. Huram said, moreover, blessed be the Yahweh Adonai, Elohims of Israel. Again, Elohims, the gods, right, under El, that made heavens and earth, who hath given to David the king a wise son, endued with prudence and understanding, that might build a house for the El, and in the house for his kingdom. Okay, so in conclusion, for 4,000 years, the Bible has confirmed a Phoenician credo found on the faith in El. For him alone is preserved the Eucharistic consecrations of penne and vino. And we can imagine this Phoenician credo, blessed be El Elyon, who made heaven and earth. So there you go. And then they get into the whole Christ Emmanuel thing, which I kind of already just showed you guys. But there you go. I mean, there's some pretty there's some pretty cool stuff. Like I said, I got so much more coming out at you guys. It's gonna be insane. So I really appreciate you guys joining me on this one. It's just gonna be a hard one for some people to swallow, and that's okay. I don't mind. I know people aren't gonna agree with me, and I absolutely expect people not to agree with me. That's so just fine. I respect you guys all have different opinions about all these things, and I love you for it. And to tell you the truth, some of you have been giving me some amazing information that is inadvertently actually helping me really unearth even more stuff. Like one of the interesting things, if you guys have never heard of this, is the legend of Joseph of Arimathea, who apparently went to England, right, and actually supposedly brought this Kolbrin Bible with him and settled where this church was actually burned by arson. So we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that legend in our studies. So this is going to be one wild ride, you guys. And I think one of the interesting things that we're going to find in this is that we're going to find that one of the great things about this that I think, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to do this, is to really show people that this quote unquote guilt-ridden religious system that we have been given is a bastardization of something which does not have anything to do with guilt at all. And that is, to me, one of the cruxes and one of the biggest problems I have with religion is that they actually steal the ability for you to understand, your own soul by telling you only have one life to live and you're going to go to hell. So, who knows? All I can tell you is that there's going to be a big difference between these different kinds of theologies. And as I show you, when the official Christianity / official Septuagint and all that other stuff comes through, you'll see, especially in the datings of the oldest versions of these, you're going to see how there was definitely a manipulation that went on. And from that manipulation, that's what they used to use as a cudgel to kill and maim and destroy people who would go against this. And that's how we see early Christianity and various other things play this whole thing out. You know what I mean? And it's because none of them, they all have their arguing points, but the ones that are really willing to murder thousands of people because of ideas, that's when you start to have to ask questions like, who are they really worshiping, and what are they really doing here? And so that's going to be a big part of this investigation into whether Jesus was a Phoenician, and also these greater Levantine civilizations' influences on our current religious systems and how they've all been turned upside down, i.e., like the demiurge in the TV show Stranger Things. So I appreciate you guys joining me today. If you really like this video and you want people to check it out, please share it. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Comment if you got some comments, or if you have little other extra bits and points that might help. I could always use help. I'm only one person. I've been doing this for 15 years or so, more than that. On my own personal life, and the reason why I set this channel up is because I figured, well, it's about time maybe I put all my info out rather than just keeping it in. So I love you all. Thank you so much for joining me here, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.